Welcome to Unraveled Secrets, where we dig into the stories that haunt America's forgotten places. I'm Clara Bennett, a journalist who thought ghost stories were just that, stories. But when I stepped into 127 Hawthorne Lane in Willow Creek, I found something that changed everything. This house isn't just old, it's alive. Whispers in the walls, secrets from a century-old tragedy, and a darkness that doesn't let go. They say no one stays here long. I came for answers, but what I found might never let me leave.
The house stood at the edge of Willow Creek, a small town where the air always seemed to carry a faint chill, even in the height of summer. From the outside, 127 Hawthorne Lane was unremarkable. A two-story Victorian with peeling white paint, a sagging porch, and windows that reflected the world in warped, glassy distortions. It was the kind of house you'd pass without a second glance, assuming it was just another relic of a bygone era. But those who lingered too long, who paused to listen, would hear something that set their nerves on edge. Whispers, faint and fleeting, seeping from the walls themselves. Clara Bennett was not the kind of person to believe in ghost stories. At 32, she was pragmatic, a freelance journalist who dealt in facts, not fancies. When her editor offered her a chance to write a feature on America's hidden haunts, she'd scoffed but accepted, desperate for the paycheck. The house at 127 Hawthorne Lane was her first stop, chosen for its local legend, the whispers in the walls. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, claiming the house had been empty for decades, yet strange sounds emanated from within, as if the walls were alive with secrets. Clara arrived on a gray October afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the earth. The air was damp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic, like old blood. She hefted her backpack, filled with her notebook, recorder, and a flashlight, and approached the front door. The realtor had left the key under a cracked flower pot as promised, and the lock yielded with a groan, as if the house itself were reluctant to let her in. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust that danced in the slivers of light filtering through the boarded windows. The foyer was cramped, its wallpaper curling like dead skin. An antique chandelier hung above, its crystals dulled by grime. To the left, a parlor, with a sagging velvet sofa and a mahogany table. To the right, a staircase spiraled upward into darkness. Clara's boots echoed on the hardwood floor, each step answered by a faint creak, as if the house were testing her presence. Then she heard it, a whisper, so soft it might have been her imagination. It came from the walls, a low murmur that seemed to curl around her like smoke. She froze, straining to make out words, but they were indistinct. A chorus of voices overlapping in a language she couldn't grasp. Her heart quickened, not out of fear, at least not yet, but out of curiosity. She set her recorder on the table and pressed record, hoping to capture the sound. "Hello?" she called, her voice too loud in the oppressive silence. The whispers stopped, as if startled, then resumed, louder now, more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the plaster and wood. Her skin prickled, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by eyes, but by the house itself. She explored the parlor, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The furniture was heavy, Victorian, draped in dust covers that looked untouched for years. A bookshelf lined one wall, its volumes warped by time, their titles illegible. She ran her finger along his spine, and the whispers seemed to sharpen for a moment, as if reacting to her touch. She pulled her hand back, her breath catching. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, forcing a laugh. But the unease lingered, a weight in her chest that grew heavier with each step. The house was alive in a way she couldn't explain, its atmosphere pressing against her like a physical force. She moved to the staircase, the whispers following, now a low hum that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. That night, Clara set up camp in the parlor, her sleeping bag spread out on the floor. She'd intended to stay only a few hours, but the whispers kept her rooted, their cadence hypnotic. By midnight, her recorder had captured hours of audio, and she played it back, earbuds pressed tightly against her ears. The whispers were clearer now, forming fragments of sentences. "She didn't know, betrayed us, blood on the floor." Clara's stomach twisted. She wasn't a believer in the supernatural, but the voices were undeniable, their tone laced with sorrow and rage. She jotted notes in her journal, her handwriting shaky. Possible haunting? Historical tragedy? She needed context, so she dug into the town's archives, which she downloaded to her laptop before arriving. Willow Creek's records were sparse, but one article from 1897 caught her eye. A family, the Hawthornes, had lived in this house. They'd been wealthy, reclusive, and their story ended in tragedy, a murder-suicide that left no survivors. The article was vague, mentioning a domestic dispute and unspeakable acts, but it hinted at something darker, something the town preferred to forget. Clara cross-referenced names: Edward Hawthorne, his wife Margaret, and their two children, Eliza and Thomas. The family had been pillars of the community until Edward's business dealings soured, leading to rumors of infidelity and betrayal. Then one stormy night, the house fell silent, and the townsfolk found the family dead, their bodies arranged in the parlor like a grim tableau. Clara glanced at the parlor around her, imagining the scene. The whispers grew louder, as if sensing her discovery. He lied. She screamed. The voices were distinct now, one male, one female, their tones raw with emotion. Clara's hands trembled as she typed, her rational mind warring with the creeping dread that gripped her. She wasn't alone in this house. She felt it in her bones. She decided to explore further, driven by a need to understand. The whispers seemed to guide her, their intensity rising as she approached certain parts of the house. In the dining room, she found a faded portrait of the Hawthorne family, their faces stern and unsmiling. Edward's eyes seemed to follow her, and when she touched the frame, the whispers surged, a cacophony of grief and accusation. She stumbled back, her flashlight flickering. "Stop it," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was addressing: the house, the whispers, or her own fraying nerves. She needed answers, but the more she uncovered, the more the house seemed to tighten its grip on her. By the third day, Clara was unraveling. The whispers were relentless, following her from room to room, seeping into her dreams. She hadn't slept properly, her nights filled with visions of blood-soaked floors and shadowed figures. The house was no longer just a setting, it was a predator, and she was its prey. The whispers had begun to form a narrative, piecing together the Hawthorne family's final days. Edward had been unfaithful, his affair with a local seamstress driving Margaret to despair. Eliza, their daughter, had overheard their arguments, her young mind unable to process the betrayal. Thomas, the youngest, had been caught in the crossfire, his innocence shattered by the violence that followed. The whispers recounted their pain in vivid detail. She begged him. The knife was sharp. The children cried.
Clara tried to decipher their meaning, scouring the house for clues. She found scratches on the baseboards, faint and deliberate, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. In the attic, she discovered a child's diary, its pages filled with Eliza's looping handwriting. The entries were mundane at first, school lessons, games with Thomas, but grew darker, describing angry voices and Papa's secrets. The final entry was a single sentence: "The walls are talking, and they're angry." Clara's paranoia grew. She felt eyes on her constantly, though she was alone. Objects moved when she wasn't looking, a book falling from a shelf, a door creaking open. The whispers began to mimic her own voice, taunting her with her fears. "You're not safe. You'll never leave." She tried to leave once, packing her bag and heading for the door, but the whispers swelled into a deafening roar, and the door wouldn't budge, as if sealed by an unseen force.
On the 5th day, Clara found the hidden room. She'd been following the whispers, which had grown frantic, guiding her to a section of the upstairs hallway where the wallpaper was slightly misaligned. She pressed against it, and a panel clicked, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Her flashlight beam trembled as she descended, the air growing colder, thicker, as if the house were breathing around her. The room was small, its walls covered in faded symbols, runes perhaps, or something older. In the center was a wooden chest, its lid carved with the same symbols. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices screaming for release. Clara's hands shook as she opened the chest, revealing a collection of objects: a blood-stained knife, a locket with a lock of dark hair, and a photograph of the Hawthorne family, their faces scratched out. The whispers reached a crescendo, and Clara's vision blurred. Images flooded her mind: Edward's rage, Margaret's despair, the children's terror. She saw the final night: Edward, driven mad by guilt and betrayal, wielding the knife; Margaret pleading for her children's lives; Eliza and Thomas hiding, only to be found. The house had absorbed their pain, their screams, trapping their souls in an endless loop of torment. Clara staggered back, the truth overwhelming. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on the tragedy, using the whispers to lure others into its grasp. She realized she wasn't the first to hear them. The realtor had mentioned previous tenants, all of whom left after a few days, pale and shaken. The house didn't just want to be remembered, it wanted to consume. She tried to flee, but the whispers held her, their voices now a command. Stay. Join us. She fought against them, her will fraying, and managed to stumble back to the parlor. She grabbed her recorder, her only link to the outside world, and recorded a final message. If you hear whispers in the walls, don't listen. They'll trap you. They'll take you.
Clara escaped at dawn, the door finally yielding as the first light broke through the clouds. She drove away, her hands trembling on the wheel, the whispers still echoing in her mind. Back in her apartment, she tried to write her article, but the words felt hollow. The house had changed her, left a mark she couldn't shake. She listened to her recordings obsessively, hearing new whispers beneath her own voice, as if the house had followed her. She published the article, but it was met with skepticism. Readers called it fiction, a cheap scare. Yet Clara knew the truth, and it weighed on her. The whispers were a warning, a reminder that the past is never truly gone. They could manipulate, control, destroy, and ignoring them only gave them power. She avoided old houses now, but sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she'd hear a faint murmur, a whisper from the walls, and her heart would race. The house at 127 Hawthorne Lane still stands, its windows dark, its walls silent to those who don't listen closely. But for those who do, the whispers remain, waiting to tell their story, to draw another soul into the shadows. And sometimes, late at night, a single whisper echoes through the empty rooms. You're next. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the whispers in the walls. If this story left you with a lingering sense of unease, share it with a friend and see if they dare to listen to the whispers. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more spine-chilling tales every week. And tell me in the comments, have you ever heard whispers in the walls?
For part 2 for this video, we will discuss of unraveled mysteries. Today, I'm diving into a chilling case that's been cold for 20 years, the brutal, unsolved murders of Lana Dawson's parents. I'm a medium, and let me tell you, this gig isn't always glamorous, but when Lana called, desperate for answers, I booked my flight to this sleepy Florida suburb. Why? Because sometimes the dead have secrets to share. Lana's kept this house frozen in time, hoping it holds the truth about that tragic night. I'm about to step inside, sit in the silence, and see if the spirits will talk. But trust me, not every haunted house has ghosts waiting to chat, and some have secrets darker than you'd expect. Stick around, because this one, it's a wild ride.
The old Florida suburb was eerily quiet as I arrived at Lana Dawson's childhood home, a place frozen in time for 20 years since her parents' brutal, unsolved murders. Lana greeted me with a weary smile, her desperation palpable. She'd tried everything from private detectives to police investigations and found nothing. Now, reluctantly, she'd turned to me, a medium, through a friend of a friend. I was just as desperate, back to this gig because no other job paid the bills. The house stood among mostly vacant neighbors, kept untouched by Lana in hopes it held answers. Inside, the air was heavy with dust, the living room bare except for a single light bulb. A lone neighbor, an old woman watering her plants, waved politely as we entered. Lana explained the neighborhood was mostly widows and retirees, a peaceful place where such a crime was unthinkable. Yet the sorrow etched on her face told a different story. As Lana pulled back the curtains, sunlight flooded the empty space. She gave me a quick tour. Kitchen, bedrooms, all untouched. Her skepticism was clear. She didn't expect me to find anything. I couldn't blame her. Most haunted houses I visit are silent. Either the dead have moved on, or they don't want to talk. But violent deaths, like those of Lana's parents, often leave spirits tethered to a place. If they lingered, I might hear them. I set a chair in the living room's center and asked for silence. Closing my eyes, I waited, hearing only wind and birds. Just as I braced to explain my no-refund policy, a faint weeping broke the silence, growing louder. A metallic, ethereal voice answered my call, confessing to a crime laced with regret. It wasn't Lana's family. It was someone else, someone tied to the murders. As the voice unraveled its story, the truth emerged, darker and more tangled than I had expected, pulling me deeper into the house's secrets.
Lana Dawson welcomed me with a tired smile. She was desperate, like everyone who hires a medium. And I was just as desperate, which is why I was back to this gig. Trying other jobs only confirmed that I wouldn't make a living doing anything else. Lana hired me because it had been 20 years since her parents were brutally murdered in that house, a crime that remained unsolved despite an extensive police investigation. She was 15 at the time, and luckily at her grandma's. She tried private detectives before, and they found nothing. In the end, I imagine reluctantly, she found me through a friend of a friend. Good thing for her, I needed the money and booked my flight right away. It was a typical home in a quiet Florida suburb, surrounded by mostly vacant houses. Lana decided to never sell it, keeping it frozen in time, perhaps hoping someday it would help her find the truth. As she led me inside, an old woman next door was watering her plants, the only neighbor left. She glanced over and gave me a polite wave. "This is a peaceful neighborhood of mostly widows and retirees," Lana explained later. "Nothing like that ever happened before or after." The sorrow still present on her face was undeniable even after all these years. The living room was completely empty. Not even spiders roamed around. There was just dust and a single light bulb no one had ever bothered to take down. Lana pulled back the curtain, flooding the space with sunlight, probably for the first time in ages. She gave me a quick tour through the kitchen and bedrooms. I could tell she wasn't very hopeful that I'd find anything, and I couldn't blame her. Never promise a client results. That's a rule I learned early on. Most of the haunted houses I visit have nothing to see. Either the dead moved on or they simply don't want to be disturbed. Not the kind of pitch that brings in clients. But spirits tend to remain where they died. The energy of death clings to a place, anchoring them there. If Lana's parents still lingered in this house, they could talk to me. I asked her for a chair and placed it in the center of the living room. "I'll try to channel the voices of the spiritual world now," I told her. "So please, we need to remain silent." That was just a fancy way of telling her to stay quiet so I could hear if any dead would actually talk. I sat down and closed my eyes.
For several minutes, I waited in silence, hearing nothing but the wind and birds outside. I was ready to give up and explain to Lana my no-refund policy when I heard faint weeping. It was soft, almost inaudible, and gradually grew louder. "Is there someone here among us?" I called out firmly. The crying stopped, and a metallic, ethereal voice asked, "Can you hear me?" "Yes, I can. Who are you?" No response. The entity resumed crying. I explained what I heard to Lana, who was now slightly more excited by the discovery. It could be her family. "Please, tell me, are you Mr. or Miss Dawson?" I tried. The weeping stopped abruptly. "Do you know where Miss Dawson is?" the voice asked. "I want to tell her I'm sorry." "What do you mean? Sorry for what?" The light bulb flickered for a second, and I saw the curtain shift slightly before the answer came. "For what I did to her," the voice confessed, its tone laced with sorrow. "For killing her the way I did." I felt my heart pound in my chest and turned to Lana. "I don't think this is your family." Now, in my experience, spirits can be deceitful. It wouldn't be the first time some smart-ass ghost tried to play me for a fool, so I didn't immediately relay all I had heard to Lana. She would probably freak out anyway, and I needed her to stay quiet for the rest of the session. "Who are you?" I asked next, to no response. "Do you know what happened that day?" I tried again. This time, after a long pause, the voice answered, "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She shouldn't have had to die." That was an interesting response. "What about Mr. Dawson?" The man got what he deserved. The voice suddenly deepened, taking on an almost demonic tone. The light bulb flickered violently.
Its reaction made sense based on what I had read about the crime scene. Mr. Dawson had died from 15 stab wounds, most likely in his bed. The killer was probably driven by emotion. But Miss Dawson showed signs of a struggle. Her only fatal injury was a deep slice across her neck. Maybe her death wasn't intentional at first. This could actually be the murderer. But why did you do it? I decided it was time for tough questions. I just want to help you find peace. It's the only way you'll leave this house and see her again. There was a long silence. Then it spoke, its words thick with emotion. "Because I loved her more than anything. I used to watch her every day, getting in her car, walking the dog, buying groceries.
She did it all with that same smile. When she waved at me, I felt it in my bones. "That doesn't explain why you killed her," I pressed. My questions likely revealed the true nature of the voice to Lana, and her eyes widened in shock. "I didn't want to," the voice roared. The bulb exploded, making Lana jump. "I just wanted to get rid of him so we could be together, but she wouldn't accept it. She wouldn't come with me." The weeping resumed. I pressed for more answers, but got nothing. Everything I had heard spun in my mind like a whirlwind. When everything clicked, I stood up and walked to the door. Lana was as pale as snow, visibly shaken by what had happened, even if she hadn't heard a word. The energy in the room was impossible to ignore. She asked me why I was leaving. I said, "I'm just thirsty. There's no running water here, so I'll ask that old lady next door for a glass. I'll be back in a minute." The neighbor looked surprised to see me knocking on her door. She was a tiny, fragile lady, maybe in her 70s. She was making bread dough, but stopped to answer and invited me in for some water. As I followed her to the kitchen, I took a look at her home. Furniture that had to be at least half a century old, and a large portrait in the living room of her and her husband, taken long ago. She handed me a glass of water and went back to kneading the fresh dough. "I hope you don't mind me doing this," she said, using all her small weight against it. "I just love having them ready for dinner." "Don't mind me at all," I thanked her, sipping the water slowly. "By the way, you and your husband are so beautiful together in that photo," I referred to the portrait. Her face stiffened for a brief moment before returning to its usual warm smile. She confessed that he had abandoned her years ago, but it was hard to let go of the memories. One day, he simply got out and never returned. Determined to change the subject, she asked me what I was doing in that dusty, abandoned house. I told her I was a medium. "Oh, that's fun," she giggled. "Did you find anything there?" "Yes, as a matter of fact, I did. I found your husband. He told me a lot about you, about him, and about what he did to the Dawson family." She froze, hands still buried in the dough. Slowly, she turned around, scanning my face to see if I was joking, if I really knew the truth about what had happened 20 years ago. I didn't. It was a bluff, an educated guess. For the killer to be a spirit trapped in that house, he had to have died nearby. For him to know the private details of Miss Dawson's life, he had to be someone that lived close, someone who could watch every move, like a neighbor. And there were not many of them around here. I had no idea it would work. My theory could be pretty much wrong, but the bluff paid off because the woman broke down in tears.
For Lana, finding the truth was all that mattered, and I gave it to her. Her family had been killed by a neighbor obsessed with her mother. In an act of desperation, he took advantage of the night to break into the house and confess his feelings just as she had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water. When she rejected him, he grabbed her and slit her throat with a sharp fish knife. Then, in a fit of rage, he walked into the bedroom where her father slept and stabbed him to death. It took me a few more sessions with the killer to get the whole truth out. The old lady confirmed and admitted to Lana that she had suspected her husband all along. And when she confronted him, he fled, never to be found, probably dying somewhere years later. The end. Or at least that's the end I told Lana. I can't say she was happy about it, but at least she knew now. There could finally be peace. What I didn't tell her was that the husband never fled. And his wife didn't simply confront him with words. When he arrogantly admitted to the crime, showing no remorse, she shot him with the handgun they kept under the bed and buried him in the backyard. I advised the woman to lie to Lana, keeping her safe from any legal trouble. That way, everything would end up in its right place. The old woman in her home. The husband, trapped inside that house, drowning in his regrets. Fuck his peace.